appreciate all of you joining us. As you know, the Fidalgo Democrats are an independent democratic association with focus on education. This evening, I think we have a very good program with two speakers, if you will, who I'll introduce in a few minutes. But first, I would like to start the meeting with an acknowledgement led by Sarah Pedersen. Sarah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Valit. As a member of the steering committee, I would like to acknowledge that we gather on Indigenous land, the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and specifically the Samish and the Swinomish. We pay our respects to the elders of the past, present, and future. Also, I wanted to say that I hope you had a great Indigenous Peoples Day yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this good acknowledgement, Sarah. I appreciate you. Folks, our next meeting for Fidalgo Democrats is going to be on November 9th. We'll be joined by Dr. Justin Irish. He is the superintendent of Anacortes Independent School District. A meeting invitation will come to you hopefully 10 or so days before the meeting. Before I go any further, guys, I want to recognize our technical team. Here we have Brad Klur, who is essentially hosting the meeting. And I totally appreciate all his help and support over the last number of months. Also, Jeff Mount. Jeff is behind the scenes. He's helping us as a co-host. Also, we have Zane Butler. Zane, happy to do all the recordings and help his grandmother. I'll let you guess who his grandma is. Send us all his invitations. Rita is Zane's grandma. The poor guy cannot get a break. If it is not Corinne, it's his grandma after him. So anyway, with that, before I introduce our speakers, I would like to recognize some of the candidates that we have this evening. And please forgive me, I'm going to, without any, without the specific order, I'm just going to grab folks off the screen and give them the microphone and let them speak for a minute or two, introduce themselves very briefly. And I think I see Jason. I think I will go ahead and start with him.
Appreciate that, Valit. Thank you very much, Fidalgo Democrats. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to talk. I am running again for Washington State's 2nd District. The redistricting maps so far don't look like they are districting Marysville out of the 2nd District, so I will be here for the duration. I ran in the 2020 race, got almost 35,000 votes running on a progressive platform and raising about $50,000. We have well eclipsed that amount of fundraising so far this year. And we've got about 10 months to go now. I'm not going to compete with incumbent Rick Larson and the money that he brings in, but we certainly will be able to raise enough money to run a competitive campaign. And we believe right now is the excellent time and a very necessary time to run on platforms that put the climate crisis, the needs of the working class, the needs of the poor, and those issues, housing issues and healthcare issues front and center, where they are not right now. And the current battle within the Democratic Party, I think, is representative of where we really need to do some soul searching and decide what the party stands for. I am fully with the Progressive Caucus and Pramila Jayapal and AOC, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, and their fight for justice. And so that's the representation I would bring to this district. I think this is a progressive district. I would like to remind everybody that Washington State is a top 2. We're actually very lucky to have a top 2 primary system. You know, another 2,500 votes last year, and I would have been on the general election ballot. And Rick and I would be able to have an actual policy discussion, which I don't think the voters of this district have had an opportunity to have in the last 20 years. If you would like to know more about my campaign, it's callforcongress.com. It's very easy. I'll put it in the chat if there's that availability, but CALL is my last name, FOR Congress.com. Fully fleshed out website with policy positions. You know, I'm just very upfront that I'm going to run a very challenging campaign to the establishment because I believe it is the time to be doing that. So having said that, I do appreciate your time, and I hope the people look into my campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much for joining us. Next, I would like to introduce Ashley. Ashley, please go ahead. Let's see. Go ahead. Hi.
Thank you, Valit. Hi, thank you for having me today. I see a lot of people who I already know. And for those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Ashley Gregorius, and I am running for state representative for the 10th Legislative District. I'm a new type of candidate. My background comes from nonprofits, education, and behavior management. I spent my whole career working with kids and adults with severe behavioral issues, making a difference for them and their families. I'm a mom of 2 exceptional young children. I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. My wife and I run a small business, and I was just born from a working class family. I'm really just an average person that wants to make a difference. I'm running because I really think that we need representatives who are going to see people who are overlooked. We need somebody who's going to focus on the climate crisis that we have. We need someone who's going to represent our community and all the diversity that we have here. I talk to so many people and they tell me that we're just a bunch of white rural people around here. And I tell them that's not true. That's just because that's what we're putting out. So I am running to show that there's diversity here and we need representation and new voices down there to tackle some of these issues. I'm going to be a leader in making investments in our futures and our aging populations, because aging population and disabilities are often ignored. And there's something I'm trying to bring to the forefront that we start to talk about a lot more at the legislature. I'm really advocating hard these days for workforce housing, because nobody should be driving 2 hours to get to work. So that's something that we will actively be seeking to finally have happen. I'm not going to waste too much of your time. So I will go ahead and put my information up on the screen, and I would love for you guys to look into me, reach out to me, tell me some of the things that you want to see changed, because I'm here to listen and be that voice for you as well. It's going to take everybody to finally flip the 10th so that we will have 2 blue representatives, and with redistricting, we can make it happen this time. I am going to make it happen. So I encourage you to please come join my campaign if you have the time, and reach out to me. But it was super nice seeing you all, and Valit, always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Ashley. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Next, I would like to introduce Amanda. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Amanda, but just please go ahead.
Hi, so good to see everybody. Thank you for putting on this presentation tonight. This is a really, really important discussion for us to be having. So happy to see so many familiar faces, people who have supported the campaign of mine running for city council here in Anacortes. See a lot of familiar donors, see a lot of familiar volunteers who have helped canvass. The campaign's going absolutely fantastic. We've raised over $13,000. We have doorbelled and lit dropped for over, I think, about 1,500 doors, which is right about 1,800, 1,900 people, which is absolutely fantastic. I have submitted my proofs for my mailer and approved everything and sent the check in today for the postage. So, oh my goodness, it's actually happening. You know, so it's been absolutely fantastic. I have had just an outpouring of support from the community, and for that I am just absolutely so grateful. Some folks know me from my time in Anacortes with the Chamber of Commerce. Some of you know me as the legislative assistant for Alex Rammel. So I feel like what I bring to council is not only a dedication to the service as a whole, but to the community as far as businesses go and understanding what they need. And then also understanding how state policy translates into good city and local policy. Again, really happy to be here tonight. Same with everybody else. I will put my information in the chat and would love to have you subscribe to my newsletter, send me a text, send me an email, or get in touch with me through Facebook. Thanks again for being here tonight.
Amanda Huvik, thank you very much for joining us. It's wonderful to have you. I believe these are the only candidates I could see. Very briefly, I want to recognize John Emil, LD10 Chair. And also, hi John. And also, I believe we have Warren Tester. I don't know if you would like to say a word or two, just introduce yourself, Warren, very briefly.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just a very briefly. I am one of the hospital commissioners. I'm running for re-election after having finished my first term, or finishing my first term. I am running unopposed, so I guess I don't need to make much of a speech here. I've done it both ways, opposed and unopposed, and I strongly prefer unopposed, quite frankly. It's a lot easier. You know, I think, you know, it's important for people to understand, I guess, a few things more generally about healthcare. I mean, I think if anyone didn't fully understand the value of having a strong healthcare resource in our community, the last 2 years have certainly proven that need, and the value of having good quality healthcare and a well-managed organization here in Anacortes. And the last several years, we've gone through a change in transition. I think it's been a good one. The leadership has really proven itself through the pandemic, among other things. And, you know, we're working to set the course for, you know, being, you know, better and successful going forward. You know, since this is a politically oriented organization, I would say there's a lot of discussion at the national level on healthcare issues, things like expansion of healthcare coverage and those kinds of things. And I would just suggest to people that you look carefully at the full impacts of a lot of what's being proposed and discussed. You know, things like healthcare coverage. Broader healthcare coverage for everyone is certainly desirable and important, and I hope it happens. But expansion of Medicare broadly or Medicare for all is not necessarily a great thing for an organization like Island Hospital, just because Medicare does not pay the cost of healthcare. And if that's what everyone is getting, you know, all hospitals, including ours, are going to have a hard time succeeding. Whereas expansion of commercial insurance or other kinds of insurance to a broader population, to the uninsured, is a desirable thing in many ways. Things like negotiation of drug prices. Successful negotiation of a large number of drug prices could have a huge beneficial impact for everyone. And the allegations of it restricting the number of drugs available or those kinds of things are mostly pretty spurious. So examine all those things. They're all important to all of us, both individually and collectively, in terms of maintaining our physician practices and our health hospital. But you know, don't take those things at the first blink. But we at all at Island Hospitals appreciate your support, and we expect to be there for you for quite some time to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Warren. I can say, unfortunately, firsthand that Your hospital, Island Hospital, is wonderful. Anyway, thank you for all the good work you guys are doing. Folks, with that, I hope I did not miss anybody, especially from the candidates. This evening, we're happy to have two presenters. The main one is Marjorie Hyde, who I'll introduce in a minute. And then we have, of course, Mark Munson, who will follow up with a few comments after her presentation. Marjorie is a retired attorney who has served both county and governments and city governments. She also served as the attorney member on the Western Washington Growth Management hearings board, that is, and as an executive director for Snohomish County. She is now retired to a small farm in Bowl, where she raises dairy sheep and makes her own cheese. That's amazing. What a talent. She will discuss the fully contained communities. Marjorie, please go ahead. And if you would please supplement what I said about your introduction. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, really. Thank you all for inviting me to come here and talk about this really important subject, which is the possibility that fully contained communities will be allowed in Skagit County. You know, we're here today to talk about something that is both very simple and very complicated at the same time. On May 11th of 2021, the county commissioners unanimously voted to give themselves the chance to fundamentally change county land use policies this year. This change would allow new urban growth areas to be built by private developers. They will be city-sized housing developments with supporting commercial buildings in the middle of the countryside. Brad, do we have the PowerPoint?
Yes, here, one moment.
So there we go. These giant developments are called fully contained communities, or FCCs. And let's be clear, this is a big deal. The policy change that the commissioners may vote to adopt this November or December would change the county's land use policies document, which is called the Comprehensive Plan, from prohibiting urban growth outside of the existing urban growth areas, which are the cities and towns, the UGA around the Bayview Airport and the tribes UGA, change that rule prohibiting growth outside those areas to allowing new FCCs to be constructed. The next slide, please. Before we go further into this topic, I want to admit there is nothing simple about land use law. Every proposition we'll talk about today is subject to nuance and conditions, its, ands, and buts. I won't even attempt to cover all of those nuances and conditions. What I will be discussing is the landscape around this issue in a general way and in the main. There will be time for questions after I finish, but bear in mind that we'd never get to the heart of this very important risk to the Skagit County way of life if we had to examine every legal twist and turn before we could talk about it. In addition, the state law mandating local land use planning, the Growth Management Act, or the GMA, makes public participation a key element of land use decision-making. Complicated though it may be, we aren't expected to leave it to the experts. So let's talk a minute about what is an FCC. An FCC is first a private development. It's built entirely under one project application and permit. It is residential with supporting commercial constructions. It's in the countryside, and it's built at urban or city intensities. That for housing means a minimum of 4 housing units per acre. So if you think about the change from a rural zoning of, say, R10, somebody with a 10-acre lot in the rural zone would be restricted to one house on 10 acres. If you had urban densities, you could have 40 houses on those 10 acres. So it's a very different intensity of housing and other buildings into what has been rural before. And it is also something that is without city government. So although it's like a city, it's intended to be like a city, it has no supporting city government. It's simply a private development. And we'll get to some of the experiences that other jurisdictions have had with FCCs and the problem of not having a city government. So when we think of FCCs, I think it's the next slide, Brad. Here's one example. This is Redmond Ridge in King County. And you can see, this is from the air, you can see how it's surrounded by forest lands in many of the areas. It's all urban, and it actually the Redmond Ridge one in King County covers several different projects, and those taken together create this large urban area between other cities. And then the next slide, we can see Tahali, which is in Pierce County. This was originally started as Cascadia. It's an example of an FCC plan that had to be abandoned during the housing crisis, or the bursted bubble in 2008, 2009, and a different developer picked it up and finished it. So what you'll find with these and the experience with them is that because they're urban in density, intensity, whatever is built there, that they really do need city services. And eventually what tends to happen is they're annexed. So you're talking about something that really can't sustain itself on a rural standards, which is what it's built under. There are, so far, we don't know what kind of FCC might be built in Skagit County. We know that there's a proposal for a policy change to allow them to be built. We know that the Avalon proposal, which was withdrawn but is still potentially going to be submitted, was for an over 55 community. Another kind of community you can imagine, I'm not quite there yet, would be a commuter community, or people who are more able to work at home now, and with the Seattle housing market forcing people further and further away, that an FCC might well attract commuters, and potentially even create a company town. If those of you who have been following the Amazon warehouse that we didn't really know was Amazon until it was all approved, you can imagine a large company coming in and building its own facilities and supporting housing around it. So these are the kinds of things that could be encompassed in a fully contained community. So let's talk a little bit about why it would be bad for Skagit County. Compared to Redmond Ridge and Tahali, both of which are in urban areas, Skagit County is not an urban county yet, and it's not inevitable, so remember that. But the kind of development that's being proposed is really a significant impact. So the proposal currently is to allocate 3,500 people to this new FCC, and that is would be an area roughly 3.5 times the size of La Conner. And Brad, I think we do have a slide on that. Then the next one. So you can see that's kind of as close as we could get to looking at La Conner and how it's set up, and then figure this new one would be 3.5 times the size of La Conner. It would not be supported by city government. It would be in the county. which means services would be at rural levels. Sometimes that's hard to think about, but if you think of something as important as police services, in Skagit County, there are 6 deputies on duty for the entire county at any time. So if you're talking about that proportionate relationship of deputies to people, you would have much longer wait times, and you would also have just less availability for a response. Those of us who live in the rural areas have experienced that, and that would be true in a fully contained community, because they would only be serviced at the same levels. But you know that expensive housing doesn't mean less domestic violence, child abuse, sex crimes, or assaults. It's just as likely to happen in a new community as in an established one. Next slide, please. So this would not be supported by a city government and municipal workers. Next slide is the potential for environmental impacts. And I have a couple maps here to look at, primarily to consider, we don't know now, there has not been a specific proposal. This is just opening up the entire county to the potential for fully contained communities. So one of the things that's important to look at is drainage and water, and another is transportation. And both of these issues apply pretty much anywhere you would build in Skagit County. And that was what this map is intended to show. This is rivers and streams and some diking and drainage districts. And you can see that it is everywhere. And that if you speak to the farmers, they'll say it will be the end of farming in the Delta, because the amount of drainage that will have to be handled is enormous. Next slide, please. So this, I don't know if you can see this, but this shows the drainage districts in Skagit. So all those colored ones, pretty much everything west of I-5 and along the I-5 corridor. And the Drainage Consortium has said, none of it, they simply cannot sustain more development in this kind of intensity anywhere in that corridor. So next slide, please. And this one is just to give you an outline of the roads and highways that go actually in and out of Skagit County. And the reason this is important is because transportation, the transportation needs of one of these communities is going to mean they're going to need to be situated close to one or more of these roads and highways. So if you overlap that look with what we just saw in terms of the drainage, you can see that they're almost compelled to build along the I-5 corridor. Next slide, please. And then another consideration is that it would increase the wealth gap. If you look at this chart, this shows what the median household income was in 2014, 2016, and then in 2019, 2020. And it increased from 50,000 to 63,000. But the median house price increased from 262,000 to 394,000. So we're not keeping pace with income and housing, and building large tracts of market rate housing in a market where Seattle median houses are now running $800,000. So you're having, we have a much bigger market than we did historically. Historically, you wouldn't attract the Seattle commuter, but now with the pressures, you will see more people being willing to move up here. And they won't be moving because they want to live in Skagit County. They'll be moving for just the housing. So it's not like we're anti people moving in, but they should be people who want to live in this county because it's a wonderful place to live. So the market, so therefore we can say the market's grown so much that you can figure that the median house price in this kind of development will run more like $650,000 and up. because that's what the market will bear. Okay, so next slide, please. What again, as I've said, the experience of other jurisdictions is that annexation is pretty much inevitable. You can't have these large numbers of people living together with just rural services. And so what tends to happen is they are annexed. In theory, they could be made into cities themselves, but 3,600 is not going to be sustainable as its own independent city. So that's also a concern, because if you're annexing, you're in the countryside, you weren't planned for annexation. It wasn't an extension of an urban growth boundary from a city or an existing city or town, but simply something that's actually intended to be separate and apart. And now you have to annex them. You're going to have to reach over natural resource lands, ag lands, timberlands to include them. And that's almost a definition of sprawl. Next slide, please. So we have to ask ourselves, why are fully contained communities on the table now? And this is where we get a little bit technical. Currently, fully contained communities are prohibited by the county's comprehensive plan. The GMA provides that the county commissioners cannot amend the comprehensive plan except once a year. And to do that, they docket proposals for consideration in a given year. This year, the proposal from Skagit Partners, which is a Whatcom-based developer, was docketed for consideration for passing a comprehensive plan amendment to change the policy that's been in existence for years to allow a fully contained communities to be built, was placed on the docket. And it was placed on the docket in spite of the fact that 500 negative comments, requests, please don't docket this, were received from the commissioners. So the concern that we have here is that this is happening at really lightning speed. If this comprehensive plan amendment is adopted this year, then it will be possible to develop rules for fully contained communities, which could go into effect without an opportunity to stop them. So the concern right now is the policy itself. And we ask ourselves, why should we be worried about a policy? Now, many of you who wrote to county commissioners to say you didn't want to see fully contained communities in this county got back the answer, not to worry. It won't happen for 8 or 10 years. This is not necessarily going to be the actual outcome. Once the policy is adopted, the fact of fully contained communities will be a possibility in Skagit County, and developers will drive the next step. And we need to remember that the developers are very interested in having these fully contained communities. And the reason they are is they make a lot of money. This is not going to be something where there will not be large, expensive houses. There will be, because that's how developers make the majority of their money. So it is something that is being pushed strongly by one developer group. And I actually personally have had a call from another land use consultant wanting to know, and they're following this issue. This is not just Skagit County that's suffering this kind of pressure. It's happening all over the country. And so it's important for us to respond and to know what kind of place we want to live in, because if you just let the market drive it, we will have suburbs from border to border. So once and this is the other technical part about it, is what's before the commissioners right now is the policy, the comprehensive plan policy amendment. Once that is adopted, then they will seek to adopt what are called development regulations. And development regulations are the actual hows and wherefores of the projects. These will be adopted in the Skagit County Code, and they will specify how the proposal can be submitted and what is required. I think sometimes we hear from the commissioners, oh, we're going to wait for a proposal we want or we like, and that's actually inaccurate. They need to write rules, and if the proposal fits within the rules, then it has to be considered and has to be granted as it meets those requirements. So if the proposal meets the requirements, then it probably will be built out in phases over time, but the whole project will be permitted. And that takes us to the question of vesting. And this is something that has been before the Washington courts, not particularly with the fully contained communities, more with urban growth boundaries, but it's the same principle. And that one is that a project approval will vest to the regulations in effect at the time that it's submitted. So if you can't change your mind, you know, once a project proposal meets the requirements, it is qualified to proceed under those requirements. And even if the courts or the growth board later determine that it fails to address the SEPA considerations, the Growth Management Act considerations, it won't matter to the developer's ability to go forward. And that is what makes this truly urgent. Our opportunity to stop this from happening really is right now when the policy itself is being considered. So what happens if we wait? Can I have another slide, please? Brad?
The
The next one, thanks. What happens if we wait for a project proposal? Basically, I guess you can't see that, but the ship has left the dock. The most worrisome future is one in which a project proposal is submitted because if it meets the written requirements, it will give the developer a right to build it, period. The project will likely have a long build out, none of which can be changed to accommodate law changes. Think of the effects of climate change, drainage, and water runoff. The developer can build under the law as it existed when the project proposal, which met the rules in effect then, was submitted. So again, that's the urgency here. But at the same time, it's not a gloomy prospect. It is not inevitable. If we act now, if we convince the commissioners not to do this, if we can't convince the commissioners, if we take it to court or to the board, frankly, it goes to the board first, then we have the opportunity to put the brakes on. But we need to act quickly and save Skagit County's rural character and really rural quality of life. So I would pass the mic to Mark Lunston.
Thank you, Marjorie. Appreciate this fine but very frightening presentation. With that, I'll turn it over to Mark. Folks, I'm going to take it for granted every one of you knows Mark, so I'm not going to go through a lengthy presentation, introduction. Mark, there you go. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Valit. And thank you, Marjorie, for filling us in on that. I have nothing to add to that explanation except the news of what's happening right now in an advisory group of a coalition of people and organizations that has formed since this decision was made by the commission, the board. This is a big deal, and it shows in how we've responded to it. There have been the Board of Commissioners really kind of has been playing with fire, as Marjorie has shown, especially with this issue of vesting, and how. So if you make your proposal at a time when the law says you can do that, even if the law changes, you can still do it, and there's nothing there's no remedy for that. So we're stuck with these things if it happens. And you've seen the photographs, the aerial photographs. We've all seen places that we know from being kids that now are overrun with suburban tract homes, what used to be countryside. We don't want that here. I don't, and so neither do a lot of other people. And that's why there's this group called Right Growth, Right Place, and it has an advisory group that's doing the organizing, and it includes probably the most diverse bunch of people that you'll see, or I've seen in local politics. We have the Skagitonians to Preserve Farmland, the Skagit County Farm Bureau, Indivisible Skagit, Evergreen Islands, and Home Rule Skagit, to name a few that have stepped right up. Now that's, if you told somebody that John Rusin and Tom Glade are in the same group fighting for the same thing, a year ago, people would say that would never happen. It has. This is real important policy, and people are shaking hands and working towards this. This is important. So what can you do? That's what I'm here to tell you. We need to fill out a bunch of petitions. We have many, and we need money. Because if this does go to court or to the board, we're going to need to work with attorneys and so on. We're going to need to try to stop this before it is passed. The plan A is to stop it and have the Board of Commissioners say no, because there's so many of us, so many signatures on our petition, so many letters, so much participation against it, that we stop it at the board level. And secondarily, we need to stop it possibly legally. So we need to donate. The website has everything you need. Go to the website, click on its right policy, Right Growth, Right Place.org, Right Growth, Right Place.org. And you can click on Get Involved to get a copy of the petition. And it looks like this, and you can print it out. And hay una otra petición en español también. So you can take all this and get about, I think, what is it total? About 30 signatures total. And if you can get one for yourself and tell your friends to get them and pass them around, all the instructions with what to do with it are on the petition. It's very, very easy. It's all laid out for you. And secondarily, you can donate. Just click on the donate button on the webpage. And importantly, also, and I really hope that we can get a lot of this, we need people who are willing to put up their name of themselves, their organization, their business, not necessarily to be on the advisory group. These are people in the advisory group who are actually having meetings every week and figuring out who does what and so on. If you want to do that, more power to you. But if you want to be a supporter and just put your name up as someone who says, this is a great idea, I'm behind these folks. We're working on an actual letter that can be circulated to that effect. But if you go to the website, you can contact the email and say, I support you. Keep me on your list, sign me up. Tell me when it's time, when you're ready. We're growing, we're working on 2 or 3 or 4 different fronts, and we hope to coalesce that and bring this to the board. This is a big deal. I wasn't exactly chomping at the bit to get back into county politics, as probably some of you might imagine, but I did for this. This matters. And I hope it matters to you too. So I'd like to thank Barbara and Valit and Brad for paying attention and bringing Marjorie here and letting me sort of step in and say this at the end. I hope that we can carry on, and I really want to succeed with Plan A and stop this at the board. So thank you.
What is the website?
Thank you, Mark. There is a slide, Brad, with the website.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mark.
I didn't write down the website. Would you repeat that for me, please?
If Brad would put the slide up.
Judy, there you go.
All right.
rightgrowthrightplace.org.
Oh, okay. I do have it. Yeah.
Folks, yeah, go ahead, Marjorie.
I think that's capital R, capital G, capital R, capital P. Isn't that right, Mark?
Well, I don't think,
Doesn't matter?
doesn't
It
matter on
doesn't
Google.
matter.
Okay.
No.
Well, thank you very much, both Marjorie and Mark. Folks, I'm going to propose we have plenty of time for questions and answers. If you could raise your hand at the reactions at the bottom where it says reactions, so I'll be able to see who is first, who is next. I think that will be an easier way to progress, if you will. But since Andrea Dole sent us a very early question, perhaps we can start with her, and then we'll go with John Emel. Go ahead, Andrea.
Okay, thank you. And that was a great presentation, and I learned a lot on it. And I think you're all right that once something is said okay, then everything else follows automatically. And I can say that from being on the Planning Commission. But I asked a question because obviously there's going to be some strong arguments in favor. And we haven't talked about what is in favor. And so what I'm asking the question is, what kind of arguments should we expect to see that would support this?
Andrea, that's a great question. And it's also a very complicated issue. So if you'll bear with me, I think what you're going to hear is that this is necessary for housing. And one of the requirements of FCCs is that they create affordable housing. Now, affordable housing doesn't mean the colloquial sense of the term, something you and I can afford. It means something very specific, and it's defined in the GMA. And it means rental housing for people at 60% or less of median, and home ownership for people at 80% or less of median. So if you look at housing, the market, you know that people at those income rates cannot afford housing, anything that's at a market rate. So what that means is the housing that you call affordable is always subsidized. And so it's subsidized with tax credit dollars, it's subsidized with Housing Finance Commission dollars, it's subsidized with, in fact, the development rights. And so those things will be built. How they will be sustained is with public funds. So if we're going to be building affordable housing, which we clearly need to do, we need to build it at the place that it makes the most sense. And that's why the campaign slogan is right growth, right place. It doesn't make sense to put lower income people out in the middle of the countryside where they're away from the services that they're likely to need. You know, hospitals are one, doctors' offices, social services, those are in cities. So we should be planning to build our affordable housing where it makes sense. The rest of the housing, and you may guess it's the majority of the housing, is going to be market rate. I took a quick look at a development in Issaquah, which started out somewhat like a planned unit, a planned community like this. And they have a range of housing from condominiums to small houses to large family houses. The condominiums that I saw started at $398,000. The 1,200 square foot small houses, they were adorable. They were $750,000. And the 4-bedroom family homes were 1.1 million. Now that can change anytime, but that's what it was at the moment. So it gives you a sense of when you're really talking about the Seattle market, that the scope is completely different from what we need here in this county.
Thank you, Marjorie. Mark, any comments on this, or are you okay?
One quick comment is that I think you will get the argument that Skagit County needs to share in the prosperity of Western Washington, which we haven't really been a part of. And that we're not like Snohomish or King County where the dollars are flowing, and that we're missing the party. And of course, that's all premised on the idea that wealth, it means everything. And you know, it's that market forces are always good, and the invisible hand of the markets will make everything fine. And so that's where that comes from. In my opinion, that's what it's gonna be, and we'll hear that. Jobs and dollars.
All right. Thank you, Mark. I believe next we have John. Folks, also we received a number of written questions, and after Art Huffy, I will read them to our presenters. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Valit. Hey, as a non-Skagit County resident, I just have a curiosity question. What's the position of right growth, right place on an alternative proposal? Where is the right place for growth in Skagit County?
I'll jump in, Mark, if you want me to go first, and then you can go second. We've been talking to the city planners, and they maintain that they have planned for the growth. And if you know how the Growth Management Act works, there's a population growth allocation, a number that's given to a county to say, okay, this is what you need to plan for in the way of growth, this number. And that's where that 3,600 number comes from. That's the entire growth that was allocated to Skagit County. Now, when the county and the cities got together, they allocated that among the cities, and the cities and the other urban growth areas have planned for it. So if you talk to, for instance, Mount Vernon, they've done what they call a buildable land survey. They can show you where they have available land. Now, are people going to build there? You know, developers like big stretches of property to do lots and lots of houses. That's how they make more money. But there are, what did the mayor tell us? 250 units going in downtown. There's 300 lots at Eaglemont. It's there, and it needs to be there. So you'll find that from Mount Vernon. You'll find from LaConner and Anacortes, they both have their minimum lot sizes, so that now there's the capacity for people to have two houses where there were on the land there was one. So there is land, and the cities have planned for that. That's what their burden was, and that's what they've done. Do the developers choose that? It's not required that you give them the easiest, most desirable places to use. It's just required that you have those spaces available. The other thing to remember is what we're really missing in this county is housing for people below median. That's really what we're missing. And to serve the people who live here now, that's what we need to be working on. And yes, it's a big job.
Good. Thank you. All right. Art, I apologize. I clipped your last name, Art Huffine. Please go ahead, Art.
Well, hi. Again, another Skagit County resident. First off, I want to say thank you to Marjorie and Mark for your comments. And this is why we should have elected Mark. I couldn't vote for you, but this is exactly why Mark should be a county commissioner. I'm probably older than most everybody here. And if I'm not, it's not relevant, but I'm as old or older than most of you. And I grew up in Seattle. And when I was a kid, back in the 50s, the most productive truck farming land in the United States of America was the Kent-Auburn Valley. Today, the Kent-Auburn Valley has no farming. It has been completely paved over with warehouses and cities. This is incredibly important topic. I had never heard of FCCs prior to tonight. You've embedded in my brain and it will not go away. If you want to see Skagit Valley turn into the Kent Auburn Valley, let the developers and let economic priorities manage growth. We have a Growth Management Act in this state, and that generates comprehensive plans. That is the only way you can overcome the greed of developers. I spent 25 years as a builder in Seattle. Developers have one thing and one thing only in their interest, and that is their short-term profit. What it does to the community, what it does to farmers is irrelevant. If you allow economic incentive to manage land use planning, you will turn the Skagit Valley into Kent Auburn Valley. So my question, and that is an absolute statement, and I'm an old econ major, and I've studied this. My question, and it's hard to come up with a question, how do we make the comprehensive plan and that comes out of the Growth Management Act of the state, how do we enforce that and fight the greed of developers? Because that's what the alternative is greed. And the question that got raised, what's the alternative question? What's the alternative? The alternative is the short-term profit of developers. Okay, I'll shut up. You can comment.
Thank you, Art. Go ahead, Marjorie. Any comments on that, Mark?
Well, I don't know, Art, I haven't met you before, but my grandfather grew up on a farm in the Kent Valley. So, this is an issue near and dear to my heart too. I think that the answer is that we have the right at the local level to make choices about how we want lands to be used in this county. And we still have things to preserve. Look at poor Snohomish County. That has really been a runaway train in terms of development. And so but the good part about it is if the citizens stand up and say, this is what we want to see. And I think this gets back a little bit to what John was saying and Andrea is, what's the positive side of this? What do we really want to see? And I think that's a really good place to be thinking. We want to be a county that still has lots of opportunity for agriculture, not just in the big farms, but in the small farms. Think of all the people with organic truck farms. Those aren't very big. Those are in the rural area by and large. Where do you have a place in Western Washington where people who want to live this way can live? It's Skagit County. So it's something to preserve, and we can say this is the vision we have. And the irony, of course, is the comp plan right now says you can't have FCCs. So all it takes is 2 commissioner votes, and that's changed. So, we have to be vigilant and we have to be vocal. Mark?
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to add just that we have the tools if we just pay attention to what's right in front of us. Another organization like Right Growth, Right Place is the Anacortes Family Center that has very, it draws all people of all political stripes, and they do really good work. They have figured out a way to, with the sales tax, to have subsidized housing right in the middle of Anacortes for people who are homeless and who are looking for, a better place to live, and some of it's more long-term. That works. We have ADUs. We have possibilities for using those. There are many of them that you can think of. It's just a matter of whether we're willing to keep our eye on the ball and not just go for something that makes a lot of money in a hurry, like bulldozing a whole bunch of flat land and putting houses on it. I mean, if you know, Art, that's where the most profit would come. It takes some ingenuity and commitment to make it work otherwise. But the open land is worth preserving, and that's what I think. That's the bottom line with everybody who's in favor of this. So we have to hold that conviction.
Valit, I got one more comment / question, if I may. I think the important thing here is to look into the future, is to look at workforce housing.
Right.
Not low-income housing, not affordable housing, workforce housing. And that's the people that are working in the stores. Can they afford a house? And right now, $15 an hour affords $750 to $800 a month rent. As an old builder, and I was a builder for 20 years in Seattle, the only way you can build that kind of housing is multifamily units, either apartments or condos. So that's what we need to be looking at in urban areas, I think. Comments?
No. Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
I have nothing to add. You're right. I mean, and where we first bought a house, it was an old, a blue collar house in Wallingford in Seattle, and it was beautifully made. It was a small bungalow, and it was where the mill workers and the carrier workers lived, you know, in the 20s and 30s. So we need, that's what we need. We need houses for people who are doing the work nearby. I agree.
Mark, if you would please stay on the mic. Deborah Peterson asked, are you in Skagit County allowed to make public comments at meetings of the Board of Commissioners? Would you care to answer that if you would? You know, I know both of you can do that. Go ahead, Mark. Okay.
There will be an official public comment period, and you have to make sure that you get your comments in that matter on that. In order to have any sort of standing legally, if this thing gets complicated and there's appeals or lawsuits or anything, you need to be a part of that official period. You can go to the Board of Commissioners and talk publicly anytime you want, and the same with the Planning Commission in the county. You can stand up before the meeting. I'm not sure when the board has their public comment. You can say anything you want kind of time. It's usually 3 minutes. And you could go in there as much as you like to do that.
Go ahead, Margie, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to elaborate a little bit on Mark's point that not only is there an opportunity at both the Planning Commission and before the county commissioners, but we need to get our comments in then. If for purposes of bringing an appeal to the growth board, it must be done within 60 days of publication of the adoption of the change. That's a really short time frame. You also have had to have raised all the issues to the commissioners beforehand. So that means all those comments need to go in talking about the things that are wrong with the FCC proposal. So it's a lot to do. And it's one of the reasons why we've hired an attorney, but it's also something that people individually can do. They can do it by written letters. And there's a process on the county's website. You can do it by appearing at the hearings.
Good. Marjorie, if you would, Julie Hurd is asking, what about letter writing to the editor, to the commissioners?
I'm sorry, Julia, what was your question?
What about letter writing to the editor, to the commissioners?
Yeah, that's great, but I'm not sure the letters to the commissioners actually make it into the record. I don't know how they handle that. Mark, do you know?
Usually the letters that are just received as public comment that aren't germane to a comment period, designated comment period, stay in the book somewhere, but they don't have standing.
Yeah, they don't make it into the record. But it doesn't mean they're not useful, Julia, because what we're really trying to do as our first step is to persuade the commissioners that there's overwhelming public opposition to this change.
If there were 10 letters a day coming into the Board of Commissioners and they were not in the official comment period, and that happened from now until December, they'd know what the public opinion was, and that might swing 2 votes our way. The more comments, the better. Just make sure you get the ones in when it matters.
Right. Thank you. Warren, Andrea, Jason, and Lynn, I see your hands. Please bear with me. There's 1 or 2 other written questions. They have been on for a while. Gary Jones says, are city governments in Skagit County willing to oppose the policy change to allow FCC? Marjorie, Mark?
Yeah, well, that is an ongoing effort on our part, because there's some split opinions on the Mount Vernon City Council. And what we're getting back is in our outreach, but we would love help with the outreach, is that most of these cities and towns are swamped and they don't have the resources to mount an opposition campaign. The first response we got, frankly, was they can't do that. It's already in the countywide planning policies that you can't have FCCs. And the answer is they can do it if you don't stop them. And the only way you can stop them is to bring a case before the growth board within 60 days of the date they adopt or publish the adoption, actually. So yeah, it would be great to have the cities on board, but what we keep hearing back is we're stretched to the limit. We'd like them to sign on, and that's part of the effort. And Gary, we'd love your help if you're still around.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Marjorie. Let's see, Julie and Deborah, I see your questions, your second questions, but if you would please allow me for the raised hands first. Brad, I will get to your question in a little while. Please bear with me since you are on the management team at the time for right now. I think we'll go to Warren. Warren, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I actually have 2. I guess they're probably sort of the inverse of each other. I guess I'll start off by saying, like Art, I didn't know anything about FCCs until tonight, although hearing about it, I realized that as an adolescent, I grew up in them. I grew up on the west side of Phoenix, and twice my parents purchased homes that were part of very large developments. I mean, we're talking not hundreds, but thousands of homes, and both times they were eventually annexed by the city of Phoenix. So given that, I certainly understand the issue of uncontrolled urban sprawl or suburban sprawl and the impacts of that. But I'm curious about a couple of your comments or concerns about the issues, and just wondering, I mean, you know, one was the assumption that should these communities pop up and, or, you know, be developed in Skagit County, that the existing county resources such as police would have to be stretched to cover them. And I mean, it would seem to me that there would be additional property taxes available as a result of these developments that could pay for additional police and other services. Whether the county would allocate them that way, of course, is another matter. And sort of an inverse of sort of that is if we did not do these, did not permit or did not have these communities, and all of this growth happened organically within the bounds of the various cities that we talked about, would not the impact on, say, the I-5 corridor be the same, perhaps a little more spread out? So that's, you know, kind of my concerns there, are not, but questions about your assumptions, I guess.
Well, there's a couple things there, Warren. One is the tax rate is different in the county and then in the city. So there, you know, that's part of what supports city services and why cities do the annexations, because there is property tax generated, but it's at county rural levels. So that money that is what goes to what they call the county road fund, that money goes, it's the same proportion per person as it is now for rural areas. That's the reason that the rural services don't extend well to dense areas. The second question you asked was, will we have this growth anyway? And I think there's two parts to that, is that you're supposed to have what you're allocated in terms of growth. And if you allocate it and you allow the growth to happen around the cities and towns, you will spread it out some. But yes, all growth will impact transportation. But the bigger concern about these is there's two. One is that it will all be in one place. And the second is that if the transportation infrastructure is affected, you will have it affected by people who are going elsewhere. Who are you attracting? People who you will attract from the Seattle market, quite honestly, also from all over the country. So you will be also, in addition to whatever would be a natural kind of growth factor, I would argue, and my supposition would be, you're inviting additional growth. People who wouldn't otherwise move here. And the people who would move here are still going to come. You know, the people who want to live in the countryside, they'll still come to the countryside. You're not going to come to Skagit County for the countryside and live in an FCC.
Thank you, Mark.
That's my argument.
Andrea?
Yeah. Every time I hear someone talk, I think about something a little bit differently. But, you know, maybe this is a really good thing that this is happening right now, because the public is not known to stand up to urban sprawl. When I lived in Alaska, we called Anchorage Los Anchorage. And all my life, I have seen urban sprawl, and I've seen no one ever stand up to it. And it's just as bad as anything else you can think of. But maybe by doing this now, we can concentrate and focus on public opinion, and they can get involved. I just urge people to do this. I mean, to stand up and do this. Goodness sakes, so many times they just say, well, there's nothing I know to do. I don't know what to, you know, and so it just happens and it happens and happens. And so maybe this is good. I'm coming to the point of thinking, maybe I'm glad this is happening. Maybe we can get the public to finally stand up and do something. Anyway, it wasn't a question, it's just a comment.
Thank you, Andrea. Jason, you have your hand up.
Yeah, again, as a Snohomish County resident, I live in Marysville. We have experienced massive growth in the last 10 to 12 years. And sometimes it takes me 20 minutes to get from my house just out to the freeway. And especially with the trains running through, stopping traffic as often as they do now. But the point I wanted to make is that, you know, no county is an island, no city is an island. What is happening in Snohomish and Skagit counties is really directly affected by Seattle. And what's been happening in Seattle is it's very real estate driven, and it's very property speculation driven. Is that, you know, hedge fund investors are coming in and they're buying up properties at a nice price, and they're knocking down these old historic properties, and they are building these high-rise condos, but they will let those high-rise condos sit vacant because people can't afford them. You know, they're 700 to 800 square foot condo. And I know this because my job is I'm a property inspector for an insurance company. And so I'm looking at tax records a lot. And they will let these units sit vacant because they're not making their money on renting out or selling those units. Those hedge fund investors are making money simply on the value of that land appreciating. You know, so my point in saying this is it's important who is on your city councils. And, you know, I don't know what people's opinions of Shama Sawant might be. I think she's fantastic myself, but one of the things that she's been trying to pass is a vacancy tax in Seattle, so that those properties cannot sit vacant, that you would get charged if those properties sit vacant. Now, the people who've been trying to recall her over the last 6 months are funded by real estate developers. And so I would say very carefully, as you go into elections in general, look at who is being funded by real estate interests and don't vote for those people. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. Any further follow-up, Margie or Mark? You okay? Good.
I'd like to just say one thing about that open space is a natural resource like fish or timber or you know, clean water. It's something we have here that's rare. It's beautiful. It's a place where carbon is sequestered. It's a place where trees grow. We have a lot of it here relative to the rest of the country, and we need to take good care of it. We need to be good stewards. And whether it's farming, you know, responsibly, or if it's, you know, letting things just be, or whether it's saving Heart Lake and the Anacortes Forest Lands and Deception Pass State Park and all the other open space natural areas we have around here. No one regrets not building a big development around Pass Lake. I've never heard anyone say, damn, wish we'd put in those condos. No one ever has said that. People love that place. And all the places like that we have here. So think of the open space just like that. That's how it's worth saving. And it's worth doing the work to figure out how to prevent the drainage problems, the traffic problems, which I think Marjorie laid out very well in her presentation, from happening. So that's how I look at it.
Thank you, Mark. We have, let's see, we have Lynn. Lynn raised her hand. I'm sorry, I neglected to introduce her. Lynn Campbell is the Skagit County Chair Lady. So welcome to the meeting, Lynn. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Unfortunately, I came in late, so I'm circling back to a comment I heard as I was coming in, and I wanted to check in with folks so I had a better understanding. I heard Eaglemont neighborhood was mentioned as a place to add some fully contained or add some housing. Is that correct? Not fully contained housing to separate the lots?
No, what I heard from the city of Mount Vernon is that there are 300 lots available for development in Eaglemont.
Okay, so just going from there, the person who owns this area is from another country, and he resided here but has since moved back to the other country. And I'm wondering how best to get this message out to the Eaglemont community, because right now there are negotiations going on and the landowner is in partnership with a realtor who happens to be a very strong Democratic neighbor of mine. And so I would like some help with messaging around this, because Eaglemont we're being crowded by these 50 plus neighborhoods, and all our green belts, et cetera, around here have been punched through. And that's not a bad thing, except the bad thing is all of these homes being built have a starting price of $500,000, which is of no help to what we want to help with. So I'm hoping, Mark, you and I can kind of connect on this issue. But I am wondering what we do with these investors who own land and don't live in the United States. Can the city help with that?
Mark?
That's another large subject, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it, Lynn. And I think we have a lot of resources with the organization that I'm a part of. Marjorie and I are both a part of the advisory group to Right Growth, Right Place. And resources are there to, I'm sure, can be made more available to you. So yeah, you know how to reach me or Marjorie. So,
of course.
So please do.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, guys. Charles, thank you for being patient.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am a new resident to Washington. My wife and I moved here just 1 year ago, and from New Jersey, the land of planned urban developments and sprawling suburban communities for sure. I spent 50 years as an educator working in public schools in New Jersey and in state government. And I haven't heard anyone talk about the impact of the FCCs on the construction of schools, the expansion of existing schools, the staffing of those schools, the impact on boards of education and administration of those school districts. It's monumental. Often these developers will donate a parcel of land to construct a new school. And that's wonderful, except that the cost of construction and operation is substantial and it's not short term. The deficit that it throws on top of a community is substantial. And if these are, I'm going to call them outlier communities in the sense that they're rural areas with small school districts, the impact is hard to even wrap your arms around. So I wonder if that either of our speakers might have thoughts about that.
It's an excellent point, Charles, and I think it's a complicated one too, in terms. But I think your experience with it in New Jersey is probably really going to be, a helpful touchstone. I think, as you say, the big worry is you build something, but what about staff? Who's going to now be the teachers, the staff? I mean, I have to say, as Democrats, we recognize the value of labor. Sometimes it seems like that people think you just build something and it's all done. There's all the work that goes with actually being the teachers and the janitorial staff, et cetera.
I'll just add as a clarification, in the last school district where I was superintendent of schools, I entered in 97 in a school district with about 3,300 students, K through 12, and left 5.5 years later at almost 7,000 students. Extreme development where we went through opening at that time a $34 million high school. And then 2 years before I left, approved a referendum for $43 million to expand what had been a 900 pupil high school originally, housing 1,200 middle school children, to become a 2,000 pupil middle school, student middle school. So the impact on our community was substantial in terms of having to go through that kind of construction. And they approved it. We approved both of those referendums the first time out. Our community was extremely supportive. They understood schools react to the community. You don't build schools in anticipation. You usually are not building them until your existing schools are already overcrowded and you're in trouble. And we have trailers. I see the trailers and relocatables here in Mount Vernon. So we're in trouble here for sure, because that's not necessarily adequate housing for children. Be that as it may, the impact is just substantial.
That's a good point.
Thank you, Charles. Brad, thank you for being patient. I'm going to read your question. What examples can we find in other places of how to grow our valley in a better way than the developers will do to maximize their return? Is it to follow the city planners' advice or advices? Morgan? Thank you, Senator.
I'm not quite sure I got the question.
It's in the chat if you wish. Go ahead, Brad.
The idea is that if we can point to other places that have done what we would consider to be a better job than just letting market forces have their way with us, as Mark was implying, it might be really helpful. It's one thing to invent the wheel, but if you can point to it, if you can point to a wheel that's already been invented and say we want to do that, whether it's in another country or wherever it might be, that's helpful, so, as kind of a case study in how to do it right versus just, having it happen. And like I'm saying in the second part of my question, there may be the city planners, and maybe this whole argument boils down to, let's follow the city planners' recommendations rather than do the FCC's. But I think in the mind of the public, they understand things better when we can show them the example of where we'd rather go than the valley in South Seattle or what have you. Does that make sense, Marjorie?
Yeah, I get your point. I think it's the question of, point to the positive. How could this be better? And I think that we've been sort of focused on where the disasters have been, so they don't just rush to mind. I think one of the questions that somebody raised about, I think it was Lynn, about investors coming in. I mean, that's another kind of change in the way the markets run, is that housing is much more commodified. And so people own it as an investment, not to live in it particularly. And that then puts increased pressure on more and more building. So are there tools to work with that? I think it's worth exploring. I'm not sure I know what they are. Do you, Mark?
Is anybody putting our ideas into action? We put together resolutions and reasons that substantiate those resolutions, and the whereas and where ours and therefore. In fact, I think a number of us are pretty familiar with that process. Is that something that would be really functional in terms of serving our this campaign?
It's a good question. I mean, messaging is all really helpful, ways that we can explain to people what's going on and what they can do about it. There have been some messaging, there have been some resolutions by the Puget Sound Council of Governments, who has decided against FCCs. So some of the jurisdictions that have experimented with it have said, no more, we're not doing this anymore. But in terms of what do we do instead, I mean, good planning principles, following the urban growth areas, working out of the cities and towns that exist now, and having the growth happen gradually, but also somewhat organically. People move there because they like the town. I don't know, Mark, do you have a feeling about the resolution idea?
I think that we basically have a good model already about just keeping things that are valuable, that there have been spontaneous movements around in this area to keep Pass Lake and Heart Lake and the forest lands, and to actually stop logging the forest lands at some point. And those things happened from the citizens. So that's one part of the equation of having urban centers and open spaces. And I think that basic model is what we're striving for with farmland and natural areas in between. Could we flesh that out and work with it with the models we have? And I've said the Anacortes Family Center for the affordable housing, the subsidized housing, what kind of points of other market-based housing the city planners put in, and then maintaining open space at what is supposed to be 80-20 population split between urban and rural, 80% urban, 20% rural, and making sure we hold that balance. And I think we could write, someone could write that up as a wherefore and whereas, like you say, Brad.
Thank you, Mark. Folks, just to wrap up the meeting, a final question from Deborah Peterson, a short one. Don't comprehensive plans have to be approved by the GMA board? Mark or Marjorie? Marjorie?
Okay. This is another giant topic, Deborah. initially they had comprehensive plan requirements, adoption requirements in the, really early 90s. Then there have these sort of amendments to comprehensive plans, and that's what we're looking at. So an amendment is presumed valid, and so the burden is on the challenger to show that it isn't. So in order to do that, you bring a petition to the growth board. So they don't have to approve it. You can take a challenge to them and they can say, this is or isn't compliant with the Growth Management Act. So that's how we have a potential appeal and a legal route. If the commissioners don't listen to public opinion, go ahead and adopt this policy, then we would be making a petition to the growth board. But they don't have to ask the growth board for permission. We have to challenge it. And I think that has been sort of a sticking point for some of the city planners to say, well, you can't do this because we already have this law. And the answer is, if you don't challenge it within 60 days, it could be the worst obvious violation in the world and it wouldn't matter. You have to bring your challenge and you have to have raised it to them, to the commissioners, before they did their adoption.
So as a follow-up, I'm not from Skagit County, I'm from Jefferson County, but presumably your comprehensive plan was adopted with a lot of public input and it's been updated at various times over the years. And it probably has very strong elements about preserving agricultural land and open space. And, that's really going to be your basis for challenging this, because it's a process that gives validity to the comprehensive plan because it's a slow, deliberative public process.
Right. But the problem is that that the public has to be on the ball, ready to go, watching and participating, because if you don't bring your challenge before the commissioners and then make a petition for appeal within 60 days, it's gone forever. Your challenge is gone forever. So that is why we are watching this right now. We're preparing to bring a petition if we need to, and we're because it really matters, but it can't be challenged just any old time. It has to be right away.
Thank you very much, Marjorie and Mark. I totally appreciate you coming in and doing this fine presentation. I appreciate you guys. Folks, we had approximately about 51 individuals join us and bear with us here. I propose we wrap up the meeting. It's about 8:30 or so. Having said that, now I think Brad is going to unmute everybody so we can all speak at the same time. It's free time for all of us and we can stay as long as you want us here. So anyway, again, I totally appreciate Marjorie and Mark and all of the participants, especially the candidates. Thank you very much for joining Skagit Democrats. I'm sorry, Skagit Democrats as well as Fidalgo Democrats. As you know, Skagit Democrats are doing the technical work behind the scene. It's wonderful to have you folks. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.